This is a 2001 Isuzu VehiCROSS. Most of you don't know about the VehiCROSS, so let me sum it up for you really quickly. It's weird. This one is a little weirder than most of the other VehiCROSSes though, because this is the very last VehiCROSS ever manufactured in the world. Today's video should be fun. First, a little overview. Now, the VehiCROSS came from Isuzu, best known in the United States for selling SUVs throughout the 1980s, 1990s, and the early 2000s, and also for selling commercial vehicles and box trucks. Now, most Isuzu models were all about practicality. They had the Trooper and the Axiom. When I was a kid growing up, my mom's family car was an Isuzu Rodeo. All that stuff had 4 doors. It was very practical. And then there was the VehiCROSS. Isuzu initially started selling it in Japan in 1997, where it didn't really take off. They thought it might do better in the North American market, and well, it didn't. They sold it here from 1999 to 2001, and over those 3 model years, they only ended up selling a little over 4,000 examples. Every VehiCROSS had a 3.5-liter V6 with 215 horsepower, which was a lot back then, 2 doors, an automatic transmission, a 4-wheel drive, and this weird styling. For most people, the VehiCROSS is an automotive afterthought. For me, I've always wanted to know more about it, so I've come all the way to Southern California to check out this VehiCROSS. Today, I'm going to show you around it. I'm going to show you all of its interesting quirks and weird features. There are many. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and find out how it drives, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. And for more of my thoughts on the VehiCROSS, click the link below to visit autotrader.com/oversteer, where I've compiled a list of the other weirdest SUVs currently listed for sale on AutoTrader. First off, we gotta talk styling. This VehiCROSS is completely unmodified. This is how they came from the factory, with this weird curvy design and the enormous plastic cladding on the bottom. And around back, there's this weird tire cover thing. I remember when I was a kid and these were new, they were weird looking then and they're still weird now. And Isuzu made a lot of them in yellow, which only added to the weirdness. Now, beyond the styling, I wanna talk about a quirk of this particular VehiCROSS that I mentioned earlier, and that is the fact that it's the last one ever made. Now, when people in the car world tell you they have the last of something, be skeptical. Usually they mean they have the last of a certain transmission or a certain color or a certain option, stuff that doesn't really matter to anybody. But folks, this is the Barrett-Jackson Special. This is the very last VehiCROSS, and the owner of this car even has a copy of a letter from Isuzu with the VIN on it certifying it as such. It also says that the VehiCROSS was Isuzu's halo product designed to show that they were a specialist in building sport utility vehicles. Now, what exactly does having the last VehiCROSS get you? Well, the notoriety, of course, but also a special paint color. As you can see, this car is finished in this nice metallic pearl white color. That was only painted on this VehiCROSS to commemorate the end of production. It wasn't on any other model. Now, something else before I dive into the interior and exterior quirks and features of this car. One other thing the owner has, he has the original window sticker of this car showing an MSRP of around $31,000 back in 2001, which translates to about $44,000 in today's money. Keep that in mind as I'm showing you around. Back at the time, a 2001 Ford Explorer started around $28,000 with shipping. A Jeep Wrangler started at $14,000, and the nicest model, the Sahara, was only $24,000. So $31,000 for this thing with 2 doors from a weird brand, that was a big ask back in 2001. Now, I'll begin the quirks and features on the outside. I'm going to start up front with the headlights. Not only do they have sort of a weird design, but they have horns in them. Seriously, look at them. They have little horns. Now, what those are, when you turn on the headlights light up below the horns, and the horns light up in orange as just sort of like a little running light or a parking light. But there they are. They protrude from the headlights, but I'm not really sure why. They're not a turn signal. They're just horns. Next up, moving on to maybe the VehiCROSS's most obviously unusual styling trait, that would be the body cladding. Take a walk with me around the VehiCROSS. You will notice that the body cladding goes around the entirety of the vehicle, and that there are rivets at various points to rivet the body cladding to the VehiCROSS. Front, sides, rear, there are rivets and cladding along the entire thing. A nice little hallmark of the VehiCROSS. Next up, another interesting VehiCROSS quirk on the outside, that would be the wheels. This thing has 18-inch wheels, which is insane. My 2012 AMG Mercedes has 18-inch wheels, and so does a 17-year-old Isuzu. It's so crazy. The early VehiCROSS models had 16-inch wheels, and I remember when I was a kid and they came out with the 2001 models that had the 18s, I thought they were massive, just gigantic. No one was doing 18-inch wheels, and even today, after all the wheel size escalation, these wheels still look big. Another interesting styling detail on the outside of this car, that would be the giant C-pillar. Now the A and B pillars are normal. The C-pillar of this car is huge. It's like 2 feet from back to front. This was actually pretty common in two-door SUVs of the 90s and the 2000s. They put these huge C-pillars on, and it greatly impeded visibility. Now Isuzu took this as an opportunity to advertise that you were looking at a VehiCROSS with the cool little VehiCROSS logo. Interestingly, that is the only place on the exterior of this car where the word VehiCROSS actually appears. Oh, and by the way, since we're talking about the word VehiCROSS, one thing to notice, the word VehiCROSS was a little different from a traditional word. Via was normal, but then cross was supposed to be capitalized, and Isuzu did it this way in all of their marketing communications about this car. It wasn't just the VehiCROSS, it was the VehiCROSS. One other interesting item back here is the little Isuzu OK decal. I guess they put this on in the factory in Japan to let you know that this one has been inspected and it's okay to go. My mom's rodeo had the same decal. Of course, if this window ever gets broken, they replace the window, you won't have your little OK decal. So then how are you supposed to know if you're buying a used one if it's okay? The next interesting thing about the VehiCROSS would be the fuel door. Now, like a lot of rugged SUVs, it has this riveted fuel door to make it look tough. But that isn't even close to the strangest thing about the fuel door. The strangest thing is the fact that it is currently in its lock position. If you want to unlock it, you lift up this metal flap, and it really is metal. You can hear it when you lift it up, and then you stick the key in and unlock it, and only then can you access the fuel door. There's no way to release it from the inside, and you can't just walk up and open it. You have to stick the key in order to open the fuel door. Speaking of the fuel door, check out this warning label right above it. Do not wipe the plastic panel when fuel spills out to avoid scratching it. But of course, you wouldn't want to damage your precious plastic cladding. Now, moving on to the back of the VehiCROSS, there are many weird things back here. We will begin with the rear window. Now, as you can see, the tailgate has an odd shape to it on account of the tire, which I'll get to in a minute, but that means that the rear window also has the same odd shape. It sort of arches upwards to go over the tire, and that means that the rear defroster lines make the same arches, sort of gradually lessening as you go up the window. It certainly is one of the most bizarre rear window designs I've seen, and it doesn't exactly do wonders for rear visibility. But Isuzu knew that the rear visibility would be bad, so they had a little trick up their sleeve. This car was one of the very first vehicles ever commercially available with a factory backup camera. When this car was introduced in Japan back in 1997, you could get it with a backup camera to adjust for the fact that it had this giant tire here and there wasn't much rear visibility. The camera mounted right here above the word Isuzu on the tailgate, and it gave you extra visibility when you were backing up. Unfortunately, when they brought the VehiCROSS to the United States in 1999, they ditched the camera, so none of the US models have it. But the owner told me that some VehiCROSS enthusiasts actually have found the backup camera parts and the screen and have fitted a backup camera to their US model VehiCROSS. Nonetheless, it had it, just not in the US. And I'm still in back because there is still more to cover back here. In fact, the next quirk is one of my favorite VehiCROSS quirks. Now, the VehiCROSS was a limited production, sort of low volume car made for only a few years, so they didn't want to bother giving it its own key fob remote, so it borrowed the one from the Isuzu Trooper. It has 2 buttons on it, lock, unlock, and there's a button here for the hatch. Unfortunately, the Trooper had a hatch, but the VehiCROSS, well, it doesn't. You press the hatch button and nothing happens. It was a button that just did nothing and had no programming if you got a VehiCROSS. Instead, the VehiCROSS has a tailgate, and the only way to open it is stick the key in, turn it, and then it opens like a door. So even though there is a hatch button on the key fob, there is no hatch, and if you press it, nothing happens. And then we move on to the spare tire. Now, a lot of SUVs from this time period had 2 doors, and their smaller size meant that it was hard to mount the spare tire under the car, so a lot of 2-door SUVs from this time period also had rear-mounted spares. The Suzuki Sidekick, the Jeep Wrangler, my Land Rover Defender. This thing also has a rear-mounted spare, as you can tell from the tailgate, but the access isn't from the outside, it's from the inside. You get in here and you undo these things. I've already done the ones over on that side. And then this whole cover pops off, and there is your spare tire. Now, because this thing had 18-inch wheels, they could only really get a space-saver tire in here. They couldn't do a full giant thing, but nonetheless, you have a temporary tire on your VehiCROSS. Now, when you're sitting here from this angle, you can really see just how odd that rear window was, that it was sort of pinched in the middle in order to accommodate this tire. And you can also see another interesting thing that happens as a result of the tire. Because the bumper is lower to also accommodate the tire, it actually has sort of a nice low load floor, almost like a car or a van, so you can get stuff in here pretty easily, or at least in the middle, in the part where the tire is. Next up, climbing inside the VehiCROSS, the first thing you notice when you get in one of these, you can't help but notice, that would be the interior color. It's insane. I don't think Isuzu had the money to really go as crazy with the interior as with the exterior, so instead they were like, let's just give it some crazy colors. And so the door panels are bright red, the seats are bright red, they even integrated bright red into the steering wheel. None of this would have been that weird except for the fact that it didn't really matter what color the exterior of your VehiCROSS was, you just got a bright red interior. One interesting item about those bright red seats, they aren't just any bright red seats, they're Recaros, like a sports car would have. Above the Recaro logo is printed the VehiCROSS logo. That's the only place you'll find it on the inside of the car, just like the C-pillar was the only place on the outside. Now, once you get inside and get past the crazy interior color, you'll notice there are a few other interesting quirks in here. For example, on the door panels, there is this faux carbon fiber trim. Now, carbon fiber wasn't particularly common back in 2001, even on sports cars, but especially not on SUVs. This wasn't intended to really be a sporty, high-performance SUV, so I don't really understand why Isuzu would have wanted to include fake carbon fiber on the door panels, and yet they did. Another item where I'm not really sure why Isuzu decided to do it that way, that would be the font on the gauges. This is supposed to be a young, hip, sporty, weird SUV, and the gauge font is like the most traditional, old-school Buick-looking thing you're ever gonna see. It's a really strange decision, especially for something you have to look at very often. And speaking of the gauge cluster, another interesting thing in there is the torque on demand graphic. Now, this thing was rear-wheel drive unless the car started to detect some slippage, and then it would start sending power to the front. Isuzu called this system torque on demand. Now, when you turn on the car, it lights up with just the rear wheels in green. That's because it's in two-wheel drive. But shift into four-wheel drive or get some slippage, floor the accelerator, for instance, and it starts to send power to the front, and the graphics light up in the front to show that power is going to the front wheels. It doesn't really update in real time, but it does update, and this would have been pretty advanced for 2001. Another interesting thing about this car, the VehiCROSS has climate control vents in the normal place, of course, just like any other car, and it also has vents down at your feet in case you want air to be blown down on your feet, but it also has something interesting, and that would be a vent right under the steering column that blows air directly, I guess, between your legs, which is sort of an interesting thing to see. I've never really seen that before, but I guess it can keep you cool in that region. Moving on to the middle of the VehiCROSS, below the transmission lever and the four-wheel drive selector, you will see one button marked winter and another one marked power. Winter power. The winter button sort of limits your speed so that you can't go too fast and start slipping. The power button adds like an extra 800 RPM so that you can have better acceleration in your carbon fiber trimmed VehiCROSS. Next up, moving over to the middle of the VehiCROSS interior, we must talk about the radio. Now, the stereo in this thing is the factory stereo that came with it, and just look at this thing. The next time you complain about your infotainment system not being responsive enough to your touch, just remember, not too long ago, we were using these things, and the only screen was smaller than my thumb. With that said, the VehiCROSS does have a 6-disc CD changer mounted in dash. It's further down, so you could listen to 6 different CDs and sort of cycle through them. Pretty good. Now, below the 6 CD changer, something I really like about the VehiCROSS, and that would be the fact that when the dashboard and the gear selector area came together, they didn't want to leave a blank space there. They didn't really know what to do, so they just stuck a piece of plastic in there with 3 nice contour lines, so it looked like the whole thing sort of flowed into one. That was interior design in the 1990s. And speaking of those 3 lines across that little plastic piece, how about another spot in the interior where there are 3 weird lines? That would be the headliner. I guess because they didn't want to make the headliner just a normal old regular one, they stuck 3 little contour lines in the middle. It's really strange, but that's what they did. Also interesting in the headliner is the dome light. Unlike every other car dome light where you can turn it off or on or set to turn on when the doors are open, this one is a little bit weird inverter. Instead, you press basically the entire light to turn it on, and then you press the entire light to turn it off again. Another interesting interior lighting detail in the VehiCROSS, there is no dome light in the front. There's only that one in the middle of the headliner in the back, unless you look closely at the interior rear view mirror. Take a look at that and you will see two little switches mounted on the bottom of that mirror that say reading lamps. Push those switches and they turn on little lamps mounted on the bottom of the mirror that you would never otherwise see. You probably wouldn't know that they're there unless you know that they're there. Our final interior detail in front, we must move on to the VehiCROSS glove box. The glove box is normal, very utilitarian, but it does contain the owner's manual. And take a look at that pouch the owner's manual is in. That was pretty nice in 2001. It even has Isuzu Go Farther embroidered. It's a very nice piece. Now inside the owner's manual, there are a couple of interesting little tidbits, one of which is on an early page, there's a nice note to VehiCROSS owners that says in part, just remember your Isuzu dealer knows best, and they're interested in your complete satisfaction. Of course, Isuzu hasn't been around for like a decade, so I guess that just isn't true anymore, frankly. Now, next up, moving on to the next page, we find what may be my very favorite thing in the entire VehiCROSS owner's manual, and that would be this little symbol. It says, this symbol means what may cause death or injuries to you or other people. Now, putting aside the obvious grammar problems with that, I like the fact that they introduce you to the death symbol early on in the owner's manual and just sort of let you know anytime you see this, something that may kill you. And the last interesting thing in the owner's manual, that would be these little business reply mail cards in the back that you can send into Isuzu's headquarters to let them know that the vehicle has changed hands in case they're going to send out a recall notice or maybe if the warranty is still active. Now, I looked up the address on these things and it comes back to a law firm and an insurance agency. Maybe we should send one of these things in, let them know, hey, if you ever get a door panel that isn't red, we'd be interested. Okay, so those are all the quirks in the front of the VehiCROSS. Unfortunately, this vehicle also has back seats. I say unfortunately because you always make me climb in the back seats of these cars with really tight rear seats, and that is this. Now, in order to get the seat forward, we move it, and then we pull it forward, and that is just about the smallest area I have ever seen to climb in back. Nonetheless, I will attempt it. Oh, this is how I'm gonna die, getting in the back of a VehiCROSS. It's not that the back seats are really that small. That doesn't really look like the problem. It actually looks like there's a reasonable amount of legroom. The problem is more that the front seat just doesn't come up far enough to allow me to get back in. I don't think there's any way, my shoe barely fits past it. It's just not gonna happen. Only kids can get back there. So unfortunately, we do not have a VehiCROSS backseat demonstration. I can tell you, just from observing them though, that there are a couple of quirks back there. One is the fact that they too are red, and also the fact that even on the side of the back seats, there are little fake carbon fiber pieces, just like on the front door panel. So those are the quirks and the odd features of the VehiCROSS, and now it's time to get it out on the road, where I will, for a brief moment, be one of the stranger vehicles driving in Southern California. All right, I'm driving the VehiCROSS. My first impression is that the steering wheel is slippery. The material they made for the steering wheel, I don't know if it's leather, if it's supposed to be leather. First driving impression, the VehiCROSS has sort of a feeling of being like a truck kind of SUV. I'm actually kind of surprised. I always saw these things and thought, oh, what a cute little weird vehicle. But actually, it feels pretty substantial. This certainly feels more substantial and robust than a Wrangler, for better or worse. Wranglers feel like tossable and light and you can just kind of do whatever. The engine has some sound to it, and the body it doesn't shake or anything, but it has that truck feel. The rear visibility, on account of that ridiculous rear tailgate thing, the rear visibility is just atrocious. You can't see anything. You can see back above, so like I can see pretty well behind me, sort of like things that are high up, but I can't see the road back there. If there was someone directly behind me, I would really have no idea. That Japanese market backup camera would have been pretty nice, let me tell you. Yeah, I'm surprised at just how robust it feels. I've always kind of dismissed these things as being sort of little cute, weirdly styled, almost gimmicky. Like, oh, they're just trying to get people to buy them because it's weird looking and all that. The owner of this car told me he off-roads it like crazy. He goes with Jeep people, he's able to hang with a lot of Jeeps. It does have good ground clearance, good approach and departure angles, and of course the four-wheel drive system was sort of a pretty cool thing. There's a reasonably high amount of road noise. I'm sure that there's off-roading tires on it. I'm sure that they give off some very crashy, but almost in a good way. Like, it makes you feel like you're really driving a vehicle that, you know, is like, oh, ready, let's go over another bump, let's go over a curb next, come on. In terms of driving experience, I wouldn't necessarily say it's like fun to drive like a sports car or anything like that, but it's not fun to drive. I mean, it sort of has that old school truck feel, definitely sort of the era before crossovers and that kind of thing. All right, I'm on the straightaway here, I'm going 30, I'm gonna floor it. Well, you know, it does its thing. I mean, it's not really slow, but it's slow. This isn't fast. It's actually kind of funny because this engine at the time was, I remember when this thing was out, it was like, I can't believe they put that much power in a car that small, because you got to remember, the Wrangler had like 190 horsepower maximum. Most of them were four cylinders, 140 or 150 horsepower. Even my Defender, which came out just a couple years before this with a big V8, had only 180 horsepower. And the Ford Explorer had 160 from a V6. This thing at 215 was a monster. But in the early 2000s, horsepower exploded, and the Isuzu VehiCROSS was left in the dust, just like all cars from this era were. And so that's the 2001 Isuzu VehiCROSS, the final VehiCROSS ever made, the last specimen out of the laboratory. This VehiCROSS was too expensive, it was weird looking, it was largely impractical thanks to only 2 doors, and it's been generally forgotten by most members of the car community, assuming they ever knew about it in the first place. But I've never forgotten about it, and I'm happy that I finally got to be up close with the weird, quirky Isuzu that I've always wondered about. And now it's time for the Doug score. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the VehiCROSS is interesting, sure, but no one would consider it beautiful, and most would consider it the exact opposite, and it gets a 3 out of 10. Acceleration is pretty slow, and it gets a 1 out of 10. Handling is fine, relatively secure, but it's not quick or precise, and it gets a 3 out of 10. Cool factor is debatable, but I always turn my head when I see one of these go by, and at this point I'd find it more interesting and curious than a standard Porsche 911. It gets a 6 out of 10. Importance, however, is minimal. This particular VehiCROSS is important to the VehiCROSS world, but the VehiCROSS wasn't very important to the automotive world, and it gets a 4 out of 10, bringing the total weekend score to just 17 out of 50, which makes sense in a scale designed for sports cars. Next up are the daily categories. Starting with features, the VehiCROSS has a lot of the essentials, but nothing more, and it gets a 3 out of 10. Next up is comfort. The VehiCROSS is reasonably roomy, but the crashy ride knocks it down to a 4 out of 10. As for quality, the VehiCROSS seems reliable enough, but the interior isn't exactly gorgeous. It gets a 6 out of 10. Practicality is next, and the VehiCROSS has just over 50 cubic feet of cargo space with the rear seats down. That should give it an 8, but truly inaccessible rear seats effectively makes this thing a 2-seater, knocking it down to just a 5 out of 10. Finally, there's value, and the VehiCROSS does well. You can pick up a nice one for well under 10 grand, and they're fun, interesting vehicles that are a cool, weird departure from the typical Jeeps you always see on the trails. I'm giving it a 7 out of 10, bringing the total daily score to 25 out of 50. Add it all up, and the total Doug score is 42 out of 100, which is fine. The VehiCROSS is an older SUV, and it was never going to score very well. I do think this may highlight a flaw in the Doug score, though. I may need a separate category for fun factor that goes beyond handling and performance, as the VehiCROSS is a fun car, even though it isn't a fast or thrilling one.